Welcome to Mind Yourself, a podcast sharing real life stories from real people, alongside conversations about mental health and emotional well-being. Listener discretion is advised, as this episode may include themes some listeners may find distressing. Wherever you're joining us from, whether you're walking, driving, or taking a quiet moment for yourself, you're very welcome here. Let's get started.
So we're here today in Carrickmacross in County Monaghan with Tracy Martin. Tracy, it's lovely to meet you. Tracy, it's safe to say that you've been no stranger to trauma and life-changing events, one of which led you to become a full-time wheelchair user. Mm-hmm. Would you care to share with anybody who's not familiar with your story, what your life has been like to date?
Yeah, I suppose my life hasn't really been that straightforward in that when my parents were both dead by the time I was 15. My father when I was 3.5, my mother when I was almost 15. So that started life off in a very particular way. I have 3 sisters and a brother. They're quite a bit older than me, than I am. So, but then when I was almost 18, I was in a car crash with my boyfriend at the time, and he was killed outright, and I sustained 2 spinal injuries and multiple fractures, which then meant I was paralysed from the chest down and left in a wheelchair, paralysed, from then on, from that day forward. So that's almost 37, actually it is 37 years ago now. So, and in that accident I was around 8 weeks pregnant at the time as well. So that I subsequently lost that pregnancy, that baby as well. So there was just just kind of so many different types of trauma by the time I was 18, it was like I'd lived 4 lives by that time, it felt. And I suppose for me, looking back at it now, I almost, because I was so young, I tended to not really to push it all down and just kind of get on with life in as best way I could. But all the time, you're just stuffing stuff into crevices and corners and not even processing it all. Because I suppose at that age, it's hard to have the capacity to do so. Yeah, so the trauma of the accident was horrific, because you've got so many levels of trauma there, where you've got, you hear you're not going to be able to walk again. You hear your boyfriend has been killed. You then hear a few weeks later, well, you've lost the pregnancy you were carrying. So you don't even get time to grieve one thing. Because the trauma is it just feels like it's never ending. So you lose yourself in it. And you kind of try and bury it, but I suppose when I was on cervical traction after the accident, so you're on a striker-frame bed and you've got weights hanging from your head, and you have to lie either looking at the ceiling or the floor. So it's very difficult to run from yourself in that position, or run from your feelings, because you're literally suffocating in them. And that's how it felt. So trauma has really, I'm very familiar with trauma. It's been around my life, like, just so much. It's been a tough old road now. It really has. There's been a few. I suppose it's really changed who I am, and changed who I thought I was going to be.
Can you remember what you were like before the accident? You were just about to do your leaving cert, I think. You were 18 years of age. Mm-hmm. Were you aware of the pregnancy before the accident? Did you know you were having a baby?
I had definite inclination that I was pregnant. But I think because, again, I was very good at running from things at that time, because I was so busy concentrating on getting my leaving done. That was only, this was the end of May and it was going to be in June, so I was kind of tunnel visioned. So I did know. Well, I had a feeling, but yet I remember waking up in the hospital and them saying, and you already know you're about 8 weeks pregnant. And there was, yeah, I suppose that I felt like, well, I did, but I didn't. And what I was like before it, the accident, I was outwardly very outgoing, very much studied hard, loved going out, you know, but also I think quite insecure in myself, really. I put on that I was very, very out there with what I wore. Used to love Madonna music, used to dress like Madonna, used to think, I couldn't wait to be gone to the city, gone to Dublin to go to college because I felt like I was much older than I was. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to do veterinary or something in that field. So I did study hard, but I suppose then when the accident happened, it felt like there was the girl before, the girl after, and the girl kind of stuck in between, because I didn't actually know who I was anymore. And that sounds a wee bit melodramatic, but it actually did feel like that, because one day you feel you're somebody, even though you're not quite sure who that is when you're at that age, and then the next day after the accident, when you are conscious, you're thinking, I don't even recognize who this person is.
And so when you were 18, your life completely shifted.
Yeah.
It was there was a lot for you to process there. What was the hardest emotion? What was the emotion that was strongest there at that time?
I think fear of the future, mm-hmm. Fear of what would happen, fear of there's so many different emotions. There's fear of how I would survive, if I would survive, if the baby would survive, guilt around me surviving, I suppose anger at the fact that the accident happened, like just like a whole tangled ball of emotions. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to even tease one out, but I suppose there was fear was really one of the main ones, in just trepidation about what the future would hold and how I'd cope, and where I'd find the strength to do that, and not having, and at 18 you don't have any concept of what life as someone who's paralyzed. Well, I didn't have any concept of what that would be like. Mm-hmm. And it didn't feel like who I could be. So yeah, fear, anger, guilt, shame, probably as well. I felt kind of, just so many different things. You're just lost in your emotions because you're just paralyzed by them, paralyzed by fear, paralyzed by a spinal cord injury, and just absolute disbelief.
I'm sure for anybody listening, Tracy, it's hard to envisage a more traumatic event, that could happen to somebody so young. How did you navigate the trauma? What was it like for you in the aftermath and, I suppose, recovery time?
I would have spent around 9 months in hospital altogether, because I had 2 spinal injuries. I broke my neck and my thoracic spine. So, moved to 2 different hospitals. I was in Louth and Beaumont and National Rehabilitation Hospital in the Mater. And so you spend your time going from place to place, and in each, although there's improvement, I would have woken up with not that much power in my hands, and then would have got that back, and had a lot of broken shoulder bones and stuff. So a lot of it is rehabilitation, physio, and the whole loss of, I was in a rotor rest bed, which means you're really strapped into a bed and it turns from side to side. So, and you didn't even want to see a mirror, because you didn't want to see who you'd become or what you had become. so that whole rehabilitation took about 9 months. I wasn't discharged for that time. So you become, although a lot of my fellow patients, and when I was in the wheelchair, that was a gradual process, because you had to learn to, because you're lying flat for like 10 or 12 weeks on cervical traction, you had to then learn, let your body adjust to sitting up again really gradually. And so it seemed to take forever, and you had like braces to wear, for your back, and just trying to use standing frames and just stuff that was all just foreign language to me, while everyone else was going on holiday because they'd done their leaving. And it just felt like I was in this alternative universe to where I had been. And there were patients in the hospital that were really a good support system, in that you all obviously had something in common. You could all relate to each other, and they pulled you through, and the staff were brilliant as well. But it was a long haul.
Did you feel supported by friends and family in that period, or were there challenges there?
Yeah, I mean, I have a brother and 3 sisters, so they were very good to me. So they would have been coming up and down all the time. And because I suppose I was in my last year in school, so people were coming up and down but I was based in Dunleary then in hospital, and people were doing their leaving cert and summer, and going off to college. So I mean, there was, I suppose I didn't have the wider social network that I should have had, really, or that I could have had, or the family network. So because my parents had died so young, and then there wasn't really any, I suppose for me at that point, I remember thinking, what's going to happen now? Because I had this notion that when I did my leaving, I was gone out of County Monaghan, and not that there was anything, but I was gone to Dublin to college, and then I was gone, and then it was my own life, and I would kind of make my decisions, and then suddenly all that was ripped away, and you suddenly think, where does that leave me? So yeah, people were coming up and down, and there was support, but I did feel very, very unsure about my future, and not. I knew I didn't come back home to live in County Monaghan. I moved to Greystones instead. So it was kind of moving area as well, which to some ways looks like it's a brand new start. But at that age, because I had, just found myself in a wheelchair, and then just a different area where I didn't know anyone, going to a different school. It was, I don't know. It was just, when I look back, it was mad. Well, it was a lot to take on.
And Tracy, you said to us that the world often sees disability as either inspirational or tragic. What is the reality of being a full-time wheelchair user?
Well, I think everyone's experience is different, so that, I can only speak from my own point of view. So I think disability is something that particularly an acquired disability, is something that you have to grow with and adapt with. And you do, it's a process of acceptance, like there is with anything. I think there's a grief that comes along with it, or in my case, there definitely was, because you're grieving the mobility you had and the future you thought you would have. But I think most people with disabilities are just trying to make life as good as, trying to get on with their life as best they can, with the ability they have and with the support they can get. So I'm not sure, when I say it's not inspirational, or I think everyone lives life to the best of their abilities. I think maybe people with disabilities have more barriers put in front of them a lot of the time, because just around social barriers and environmental barriers, and so it can be more challenging. But I suppose having a disability has made me a very different type of person, because it's given me a very different perspective on life, and a very different outlook. Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know, but I see things very differently, and maybe that's because of trauma as well. I think you become quite, I don't know, maybe you see through the superficial stuff more than others, and you just view people differently, perhaps, and you see how the impact. I don't know. You see how emotions, I don't know, have to be expressed and can really impact on people if they're not, and the coping mechanisms people adopt in order to just deal with life in general.
Tracy, you had to deal with so much loss at such a young age. You lost your dad at 3, your mum at 15, your boyfriend and your baby at 18. But also there's a lot of grief around the girl that you were and the future that you should have had versus the life that you've lived.
Yeah.
What does grief look like for you, or how have those experiences shaped you?
I think grief, there's, I think grief, there's a poem called The Obesity of Grief. I don't know if you've ever read it.
No.
And it always kind of stays with me. It's because I think it's a great image. I always think it's like kind of that, that grief kind of spills over into stuff. So it's like the muffin top above your jeans, which is not very picturesque, or very nice image, but you know what I mean? It's like it spills over into stuff. So you think grief, you think you've dealt with stuff, but stuff brings it back. And so that can be the same with the accident or with the loss of a person. Stuff re-triggers that. And so grief for me is around, people say, how long did it take to, like I've heard said to me over the years, how long did it take you to accept it? And I'm thinking, sometimes I think, well, I'm still accepting it because I'm still, because my disability has changed because of age. So I feel like I've lost more of my mobility. So there's a grieving in that. So it's a constant process. So that kind of grief may be different. But the girl before, or the girl who I thought I was going to be, there's definitely grief around that. Like I went through all those stages of bargaining and rage and how could this happen to me, and why did I have this? So you do all of that, and you go back and forward, because I don't think it's linear. So yeah, I don't know if I have an easy answer to the grief thing. It stays with you. It just changes its format, and I think one of the worst, or probably one of the things that it's hard to do, is to sit with the grief. It's very easy to just keep yourself busy with other stuff in order to mask it, but it'll always come back.
Did you find it was difficult to process the grief purely because of the massive adjustment you had to make, not just physically but psychologically as well, into a world that you never expected to be living in? You also had a baby in your 20s too.
I think that's what made it just, it's like there were so many elements to that, there's the loss of mobility, the fact that you're paralyzed, then there's the fact that your boyfriend at the time was killed, the guilt around that and the grief around that, and then the not knowing how I felt about that, because I didn't find out until after his funeral, and I couldn't have gone anyway. So, you're just, and then thinking for weeks that you were pregnant, and making that your kind of goal and the light at the end of the tunnel, because you can't see how you get there otherwise. And then for weeks later to be told there probably was something there at one time, but there isn't anymore. Like that was kind of just the rug pulled out from under you, or from under me. So like it's that compounded grief thing where you don't even have time to process one thing before another one piles on top of it. So you don't really process anything. It just becomes overwhelming. So you just lie there thinking, well, who am I in all of this? Where am I? And back then, that was like 89. So there was no real counselling. There was nothing. that I remember. I mean, I think there was a psychology department, but there was nothing where, like, the patients and the staff were really good, like they were amazing and stuff, but there was nothing that you talked through with people. And once you left the hospital, I think that's what was hard. When you're in the hospital, you're the same as everyone to some extent, and then you leave and the world is foreign to you. That's how I remembered it, because you stand out from the crowd. You don't really relate to anything anymore, because everything seems so different. So the support team was I felt very lost at that time. And because I moved school as well, and I was the only person in a wheelchair in the school, and the fellow students were lovely, but it just was really, it was just like being landed in a different planet, and having to try and do your leaving while trying to look half normal. It's so just huge stuff. You just very overwhelming feelings, and just trying to kind of get through them, and trying to just barrel on through studying and trying to throw myself into whatever came next.
And then moving on a little bit further in your life, you became a mother.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the complexities of being a mother as a disabled person?
Again, that's like, my daughter was born in 94, so I was only 21, 22. So again, there wasn't much information around people with paraplegia at the time having babies. Now, there were people around, and you couldn't Google stuff then. It was all just ringing people to try and find out. So it was a scary time. It was a very joyful time, but it was stressful, because you were thinking, what way will the birth be? Would it be cesarean? Will it be a natural birth? How will I cope afterwards? So there was a lot of uncertainty around it. And then I did have a cesarean because I developed preeclampsia at 37 weeks. So, and then I developed pneumonia after the cesarean. So there were a lot of kind of bits that came in, which made the recovery challenging. But it's just learning to do things differently. My daughter was born, she was just over 7 pounds. And so just learning to do things differently, like changing a nappy and, feeding and learning to do those things from a wheelchair. When you're paralyzed from the mid-chest down is a wee bit challenging. And just then, as the little one grows up, trying to keep track of, trying to hold on to them,
Mm-hmm.
as in, because they run off and they fall, and kids do what they do. So definitely challenging, very rewarding, and wonderful. But it's a very steep learning curve, and it was back there. Nowadays, there's much more information, and it's very common, and so it's easier to find out what the best thing to do is, or there are more, this altered equipment and stuff. But back then, it was just basic.
Mm-hmm. Did you live independently with her when you had her, Tracy, or did you have support in raising her?
Yeah, no, I lived with her dad for until she was about 18 months old, and then I lived with I had an au pair for a while after we split up, and then I had a wonderful, she was kind of my home help, and then she turned into my daughter's like kind of minder as well, and she was amazing. She was like a granny to my daughter Anne, and she was wonderful. So it was definitely challenging, but it was with any, I think, they say it takes a village to raise a child, and I think, when you have a disability, it even more so.
Did motherhood change how you saw yourself or your resilience?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it gives you back that essence of, like, I think, to some extent after I had the accident, you're not quite sure, before when you're 18, you think you're just on the cusp of being a woman, and then suddenly you have the accident, you're not quite sure where you are with that. Um, and then I suppose with the birth of my daughter, it was like, it was very joyous, and it filled my heart so much to be out with her and to see her grow. And so, yeah, I suppose it was love. It was just, it's a wonderful experience. And I suppose to see that you could still go through a pregnancy and a birth, even though you have a disability and a spinal injury. I suppose it was great.
Tracy, you wrote a book, a fictional book,
Yeah.
but based on your life story, which you
Mhm.
launched, I think, in November of last year.
Yeah.
How did that process of writing creatively about your life help you in your healing process, or did it?
It didn't. It didn't. No, it did. It did. I think the book, I wrote it probably over a space of about 15 years. I kept going back and forward to it and wanting to do it, but kind of resisting doing it as well, because you had to regurgitate a lot of material in order to write it, and because there's a lot of my own thought process in it, and even my medical notes, and a lot of, internal dialogue that literally I remember word for word that went into it. So it did take a bit of delving into stuff. It was therapeutic to some, and cathartic, I suppose, to do it. There was a long process in then trying to let it go, because I felt the story was so embedded in me. It was turned into fiction. I worked with a wonderful editor, Suzanne Power, who helped me to do that, and put it on a very different perspective, because it's told from 3 different perspectives, which changed the story very much. But even still, I felt really like I was letting a part of my soul go when I published it, and because it was so dear to my heart, it was a very vulnerable thing to do. It felt a very vulnerable thing to do, and I knew that, or I felt that people would kind of, well, it's like putting anything that's really dear to your heart out there, and people are probably going to analyze it and say, didn't really, it was awful, or it was whatever it was, because everyone will see something different in it.
Did you feel very exposed?
Very.
Yeah.
Incredibly so. Yeah, incredibly so. And there was a real, I nearly didn't do it at all. I nearly backed out at the last minute. And I metaphorically and physically sat on the book for about 5 years when it was finished, thinking, no, I'm not going to do it. I kind of thought, when I'm gone, I'll get someone to publish it, because I won't have to be here to kind of, and then there was a part of me going, you know what, this is something I need to do for my own self, my own kind of, I think it was to give, probably to, as a testimony to my younger self, to publish it, to kind of give her a voice. And so it was a way of getting that out of my system, and maybe changing the ending of the story and rewriting the story, because I think that's what we can all do with our lives, if we can let stuff go. And I think that's what I learned from it, is that sometimes we hold on to old stories and old beliefs and old behaviors that don't really serve us anymore, and they keep us stuck. And it's all very well me saying this in principle, but it's not that easy to do in real life. And I suppose me letting go of that book was me letting go of that old story, and how it had kept me, I suppose, stuck for a long time. And there was, that level of vulnerability in doing so.
And more recently, Tracy, you have been experiencing chronic pain.
Yeah.
How do you stay connected and hopeful on the harder days?
Yeah, it's extremely challenging at this point, because the pain is pretty horrific, and it's like sitting on daggers most days. I use breath work, and I use meditation, and I'd be very spiritual. I believe that there's a bigger purpose to all of this, so I try to tune into that. I try to nearly be an observer to it all some of the time, in order to I try to ask my body what it needs. I try to respect my body. I try to not feel resentful or angry with it, because it's really done a good job, even, over those years. But yeah, there are very difficult times where, the only option really at this point is they say, well, there's nothing really medical we can do, so it's just quality of life stuff. And that's hard to hear when you're, kind of hard for anyone to hear. But I think part of it for me is my mind is so active, but my body is going, I don't think so. So there's that kind of almost a juxtaposition there. So you're nearly fighting with yourself, But, so I write, I kind of voice note stuff into the, when I don't write, I wake up and I kind of do stream of consciousness stuff. And I suppose it's a way of just getting stuff out of your system, and of using creativity to kind of maybe turn the pain into some type of purpose. Or at least that's what I hope.
Tracy, you mentioned at the beginning of this that there are kind of 3 versions of you. There's the girl who was before the accident, and the girl you became, and the girl who's somewhere in the middle of both. I'm curious to know, it's 37 years now since the accident this month. Actually, it happened in May 1989. If you could go back to her, to that 18-year-old, what would you say to her?
I suppose I'd say, I suppose I'd say you will find your way through this. That, that I suppose that there's an inner strength in you that you don't really see right now. And that, during this, in time you will see it, and you will find a way of dealing with this. You will find a way of adapting to these circumstances. You will find new opportunities and new love and new, if you're open to them.
And what do you think is coming up for you now, thinking about that?
I suppose I look back and I think, I suppose I look back and I think, wow, I'm not sure how she did that. So it just brings up a lot of emotion in me, in that, I'm very proud of her, I suppose. I'm very proud of her. Thank you. I'm proud of who she was, and how she did it, and how she kept going, and that she found a way to to come through it. And so I suppose, like I said, the writing for me, that book was kind of a gift from me to her. And the higher self part of it, this is told from 3 different perspectives, but the higher self part in it is kind of more her soul speaking to her and saying exactly that you will find a way.
I think it would be safe to say that she'd be very proud of the girl that you became as well. Tracy, thank you for sharing your story. I know it can be difficult to share past events. I suppose in relation to everything that you have shared with us, you definitely do have challenges in day-to-day life. And the question that we ask everybody who comes onto the podcast is how do you mind yourself in spite of it all? What do you do for yourself?
I suppose well, like I said, I'm at this point, because of pain and because I kind of just have to sit with how things are and accept them, and not and just look for the little light. I look for the little joys and to try and appreciate that, and to just let my body just accept that my body, it has been through a lot, and not be resentful of that. So, like I say, I try and use meditation and breath work to kind of just stay grounded. I use, homeopathy and back remedies, and to try and just keep my system, because my nervous system is very dysregulated with just all the pain. So it is around trying to just, this is how it is. This has been the journey, and this is what I've had to learn from it, and my body's been through a lot, so I have to just respect that. And writing, I suppose, is one of the ways I do it, because they say writing is the alchemy of the soul, and so maybe that's why I write, in that I find it's a way of expressing that and releasing the pain and turning it into something different.
Tracy, thank you so much for inviting us into your lovely home here in Carrickmacross today, and for being a guest on Mind Yourself.
Thank you so much for coming here. Thank you both.
That is it for today's episode of Mind Yourself. If something in this conversation has resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it, because these are the conversations that matter. Don't forget to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're enjoying the podcast, a quick rating or review really helps us to reach more people. So until next time, mind yourself.